And we're back to Farage, the man, "Oh, I'm not shallow, it's the size of your boat that upsets me." Sometimes it's not a dramatic speech in Parliament or a leaked video that shifts the political winds. Sometimes it's a WhatsApp message. And today, it's precisely that moment. A digital thread casually tapped out has blown the lid off Reform UK's internal war, and in doing so, it's vindicated Rupert, Arthur, Rob, Lowe, exposed Nigel Farage's brittle ego, exposed his bottom once again, and frankly created and confirmed my own suspicion that Farage is wholly unfit for office. To those unfamiliar, Robert Rupert Arthur Lowe, Low-key, is the now suspended Reform MP, Reform UK MP for Great Yarmouth, a man often dismissed as an anachronism, but ironically one of the few grown-ups in the Reform room, and he's a former chairman of Southampton Football Club, a city man, and crucially, one of the first figures in Reform to ask difficult questions aloud. And his crime, a Daily Mail interview on the 5th of March where he dared to declare, to describe Reform UK as a protest party and then labelled Nigel Farage as messianic. Politically cheeky, yes, grounds for suspension not remotely. 2 days later, just two, not even three, he couldn't even manage the biblical three, he was suspended and reported to the police on a cocktail of vague allegations, including bullying and verbal threats against the party chairman, made not apparently by him, but probably by someone in his office. The coincidence was, as I suspected at the time, simply too rich. The Mail interview was the real trigger, and now, thanks to the BBC's Chris Mason and Laura Kuenssberg, we have the WhatsApp proof. Let's examine it. Farage to an activist. Because he's damaging the party just before elections. Disgusting. He's contemptible. We are certainly damaged and within 2 weeks of nominations. Awful. This isn't the calm calculation of a party leader acting to uphold standards. This is spite. The kind of vicious, thin-skinned reflex that betrays not only poor leadership, but an obsession with optics over substance. Well, I remember some of that. And indeed, when pressed on whether they should have allowed a legal investigation to conclude before suspension, Farage's response was stark. Party image comes first. Let's not be shallow. The substance, the truth, is secondary. What a chilling precedent. Now, let me state my position very clearly. I find the claims against Lowe spurious. The timing is too neat, the messaging too telling, the party's response too theatrical. I don't care for Lowe, but it's what is happening and how it's happening. And I say that not as someone. I'm not a defender of Farage. I'm not a defender of Lowe. I'm not shallow, and it just looks bigger when you're paddling. And Rupert Lowe, Rupert Robert Arthur Lowe, is a surprisingly big fish. And when the Reform Party claims to be the custodian of free speech and principled conservatism, yet silences internal criticism with police referrals and online vilification, I think that crosses a line. I think that tells you quite a lot. This isn't reform, this is retaliation. And here's the most damning line of all from Rupert Lowe's statement. Farage has admitted himself in writing that the motivation behind my removal was the Daily Mail interview. That is why they designed and launched their horrific smear campaign against my name. It's evil behaviour. Nigel Farage must never be Prime Minister, and I agree. Because this story is not about a political spat or a grumpy leader in a WhatsApp meltdown. It's about the kind of leadership that Britain deserves and what kind of temperament must never be allowed near power. A Prime Minister must endure scrutiny. They must invite dissent, not weaponize it. And we've already seen one mad MP, one mad Prime Minister in power in recent days. She didn't last long, but we've seen one. And Lowe, Arthur Lowe, Rupert Rob Lowe's Low-key's crime was honesty. Farage's was fragility masquerading as strength. We've seen that before. Farage is simply a masculine version of Liz Truss, isn't he? When it comes to temperament, Farage, maybe somebody's going to write a tell-all book about Farage. End of an era. Part 2. Ooh, Farage. I thought that was a pencil. I'm not shallow. A man who turns the machinery of a party against a colleague for saying what others were too cowed to say. The man is not a Democrat, he's not a leader, he's not a statesman, he's a bully. And some will say reform is still rising in the polls. But popularity is not a virtue. Caesar was popular, so was Trump. And Loki's own words, which deserve more than a soundbite, he said, silencing critics doesn't stop failure, it simply guarantees nobody warns you about it. And that again is Liz Truss's situation, isn't it? She formed a cabinet that was so full of her friends, my friends, that nobody was going to tell her that she was wrong. Now I wouldn't be so rude really as to insist and to continue for 8 minutes or so saying that Liz Truss and Farage are interchangeable. I'm sure they're not. I'm sure you've put something in between them. But Liz Truss, I think, had some element of conviction and she wanted to achieve something. I think Farage simply wants himself. Farage is self-obsessed. And I'm not that surprised that Farage and Trump are aligned in so many ways, because they are very similar. But that doesn't mean one or the other is to be encouraged or tolerated. Both are stupracious and manipulative for their own ends. The prime ministerial job is something of service to the country, and Farage is really only capable of servicing himself.